Okay, 9:05. We'll start in on the official business. And just a reminder, looking at the sign in the back, that we are recording the meeting. It will be posted on YouTube. You have the opportunity to hide your image, stop your video. What gets posted on YouTube will not have the telephone numbers if you see the telephone numbers on the screen, and will not have your names. So anonymity is perfectly fine. And having said that, we can switch the backgrounds. So we don't have a lot today. Again, there don't seem to be a lot of pressing issues going on. With our staff, we've been doing audits. We've had conversations with EPA over the last few weeks. The usual kind of hitting the stretch run for the end of the federal fiscal year, which usually for us, DEP in general, means meeting with EPA and going over where we are in our various beans and accomplishments to make sure that we're on track to finish their year up to date. Wayside cleanup is less involved in that because we don't get a lot of funding from EPA, and thus we don't have a lot of obligations and beans for them. It's mostly working with them on Superfund sites, but we do have some corrective action things we look after as well, and that's more directly related. But internally, we do look at they're not as big an issue as EPA funded beans, but we do look at things like the number of audits that we do every year. And one of the benefits of working from home and having access to all of the site files through the file viewer is that audits are relatively straightforward and easy, and something that most of the staff would be able to do from home. So the good news from our point of view as we look back on how the year is going is, if nothing else, we're hitting audit numbers really well. The other programs are having, I wouldn't say issues or concerns, because EPA is very, they realize what's going on, and they have their own concerns about hitting their numbers. Things like in some of the other programs do a lot of inspections, and that's how EPA looks at part of a measure of success is how many inspections you've done. And if you can't get out because of COVID and inspect a facility, partly because of the social distancing or because the facility is just closed at the moment, it makes those inspections tough. So I think this year they are extending the deadline for kind of some of these measures into the calendar year rather than the federal fiscal year. So giving people a chance to regroup once things kind of return to whatever the new normal is going to be, hopefully in the fall. Other than that, that helps. We're kind of with the flexibility on the programs. We don't have any more information about us going back into the office, other than we do have good news for the staff that are online, that they are, all of our landlords and DCAM are working together to replace all the fixtures with no touch fixtures. So we have that to look forward to when and if we go back. But other than that, we're maintaining, doing what we've been doing for the last few months. So we're here to take your calls and comments and questions and concerns, and maybe address them now, maybe address them a little bit later. So what have you got? Any issues you want to talk about?
Well, I actually have an issue this week, other than the one that I've spoken to you and Liz about earlier. The question is, what in terms of the what is going to be expected of LSPs with respect to climate change remediation? Well, not originally, at one point, the rule, the word seemed to be that it would be, oh,
Yep.
at one point, the deal seemed to be that in terms of climate change, in terms of areas of flooding and so forth, we could rely on the official state position or science at that point. Someone has since told me that that is no longer on the table, that it's now a more general thing. And the reason the thing that triggered this is there was a presentation to the LSPA this past week, I guess, within the past week, in which the speaker started suggesting things like LSP should be looking at population trends and zoning changes and things like that. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what we're going to have to deal with standard of care.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to that too, Larry, and they had a whole series of dynamically developed flood maps that sounded like were going to be publicly available soon. And the state had commissioned these maps. Is that your understanding?
So I listened to that as well, and what I heard was that those were developed for MassDOT, but they're eventually going to be part of the resilientmass.org, which is the state source of information that we've been pointing to. We've been thinking all along that people would consult the same information that's available to communities through the MVP program. And it sounds like at some point in time that those models are going to be incorporated into that. And I think as far as what our thoughts are on guidance to LSPs in terms of what's in our regs is we weren't planning on writing detailed guidance so much as pointing to the best sources of information to use. And there are some other questions that I think we've yet to answer for ourselves, but they were asked by some of the public comments on the reg proposal as far as how many years out should people look and that sort of thing. So I think there are questions we should wrestle with and provide some guidance on. But I don't think waste site cleanup was thinking of writing a big guidance on it other than kind of pointing to what is relevant information that should be considered.
Okay, thanks.
Liz, could you issue a Q&A reference describing what you just discussed?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, I think it's more along the lines of what you might get from several Q&As addressing what are the likely questions to come up when you do this kind of assessment. So
the source you mentioned where they'll be available.
Yeah, I think also EBC is also doing a session, I think at the end of July. It's going to have presentations, I think again from the main speaker from the Woods Hole group, and Ken Mara is going to be there from the department. He's picked up a lot of the work, or starting to pick up the work that Tom Potter was doing. So he will talk about what's in our draft regulations and how we intend to finalize them. I think we talked about this a few months ago, that in terms of the climate change proposals, our intention is to finalize them pretty much as they were proposed. I'm trying to think, there were a few changes we were going to make, but they were kind of minor. We did get comments to be more specific in terms of how many years out to look and that sort of thing, but I think the thinking is we're just not ready to be that specific in the regulation, that this is a first kind of step into this, and it's mostly just to get people to look at the issue and consider it as part of the overall site cleanup and closure. So that in Ken's presentation, he can probably speak to some of those issues, but I think we want to work with the LSPA's group. I think they're standing up a group on this issue too. So I don't feel like we certainly have all the answers on this, and we want to work closely with LSPs in terms of what makes sense for guidance.
Yeah,
Thanks.
this reminds me of the old hold paramount issue that we dealt with on the LSP board, where you know, there may be a bunch of different things out there, and some are more conservative than others. And you know, I think what LSPs are going to be worried about is doing something that seems legitimate, but that someone's going to be able to complain about later on because it was not sufficiently conservative, because some researcher at UMass Boston decided the flood height should be 2 feet higher than what the state was. So we're just trying to, you know, if we know what if we know what we're supposed to be thinking about, we can deal with it. If it's very loosey goosey and it could be anything, then it becomes a problem for us.
Yeah, I see that.
So I just saw the announcement from EBC that came through while we were talking about that, interesting enough. So Tuesday, July 28th, and the speakers are Ken Mara, obviously, and Joe Family with the Woods Hole Group, as you mentioned, Liz. So just wanted to let other folks know that that just was announced. That's it. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Cole.
A public service announcement.
Yeah.
So if you have that in your email box and you're ignoring it, open it up.
Yeah. And during the LSPA presentation last week, you heard Ken Mara, step up and volunteer DEP guidance. So Ken is definitely the person. We'll see what he comes up with.
So this is Diane Phillips. If I may jump in a second on that topic, to Larry's point, the other place the uncertainty comes in that's not just the LSP's professional license is in the litigation front. Whether it's a 4A cost recovery demand, or whether it's a citizen suit based on an ancillary Clean Water Act or RCRA, and we're starting to see some of those not come up in the 21E context necessarily, because of course it's not a reg requirement yet. But we are seeing it in both RCRA and Clean Water Act citizen suits, that this requirement to take into consideration, future climate change risks from 2030 or 2070 in your stormwater pollution prevention plan, for example, and because those typically require sort of a good engineering practice tied to that, and it can be pretty complicated, and it can be it's for NGOs who regularly participate in citizen suits as a way to affect policy change. They all, not surprisingly, want the most aggressive measures to combat climate change, and especially, and part of, I did listen in on the LSPA presentation last week as well, and immediately thought of the 1,600 or whatever 21E sites that are at risk according to the model that was proposed. I know the speaker identified I think a Gulf oil terminal, but there's lots of those around, and that could easily be leading to potential litigation over what's been done about it. And that may or may not involve all of you, but I just wanted to flag that as something that certainly I've been thinking about and looking at, which is why I signed up for the LSPA program and paid my $25 as a non-member, and why I'll likely participate in the EBC program as well. So I appreciate that the reg revisions have gone through a process, and I'm not trying to reopen or say anything about that, but I do think that this intersection of climate change and disposal site remediation, will generate litigation.
Well,
in my view.
Diane, I think the point though that Larry made was a good one, which is, again, inundation is definitely a problem, and I have a site that is potentially subject to it, but it depends on which model you use. So I think, the LSPs would be looking to the department to say, this is the model to use to determine whether or not your site is subject to inundation. And
yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. All I'm saying is, even with that sort of prescriptive, I mean, I agree with you. If it's specific, then you guys get a better standard of care protection. So
ultimately it comes to wraps, right, Larry?
No, I mean,
No?
it does, Matthew, but it doesn't. This is the whole Paramount business again. If there's a specific standard out there that we have to meet, a specific time in the future, a specific model we're supposed to use, then that basically defines wraps. It doesn't. What we don't want is something where we have to go out and develop our own model for every site.
Yeah, I think the regs just say you have to consider climate change, and foreseeable needs to take climate change into account. That's my memory, something to that effect.
Well,
And
the place that wraps comes in the draft is in the list in wraps of what guidance to consider. We did insert EEA guidance or information, and that was specifically to tie it into that information that's being put out by EEA.
Yeah, good. I mean, that's what we're looking for, is something that ties it to a particular point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
my site is that former Amoco terminal next to the Gulf terminal on the Chelsea River, both of which are.
Yeah, there's like 8 terminals on Chelsea Creek. So,
right.
Well, and the other thing too is that the resilientmass.org webpage changes every time someone does a new study or a new model. So standard of care is going to end up being a moving target every time something different gets posted there without some amount of guidance.
Well, in a sense, that's sort of, the cleanup standards have changed over time too.
Yeah.
So again, you'd be judged by what was in effect at the time you did your opinion.
Yeah.
I would assume.
I would assume that too. That's.
Well, and certainly when we're doing the judging, that would be the way we'd look at it, say during an audit. But I would also throw out there that even before the reg changes, there are a lot of places in the MCP where LSPs and the PRPs have to take into account the current and the future conditions of the site, not only the site uses, but the site conditions. So while the proposed changes specifically mention climate change, in theory, going to the question of potential lawsuits, that potential already exists because there is an obligation to look at current and future conditions, and that is part of the future conditions. So the question really is, how do you specifically look at it? And we take Larry's point and everybody else's point that the more specific, you know what I'm trying to say, that word, that you have, the more cover, to use Matthew's word, one gets. But also keep in mind that we are going to have to be weighing the other pushback that we will be getting, in that when we are very specific, people often point out that the MCP is built on performance standards, and be as specific as you like, DEP, but allow for the application of professional judgment and incorporation of new information, and don't be overly prescriptive. So this is another area where we'll try to walk that line of having enough information and answering some of the questions, like if you do the work in 2022 based on the information you have in 2022, that is what you will be measured against. It should be measured against, or rather than information that comes out in 2026.
But Paul, I believe, and to maybe Diane's point, I don't have my MCP open in front of me, but I believe there's a provision that says if the LSP has, comes to knowledge that something changed, which would call into question the waste site cleanup decision, then you have an obligation to communicate that at the least. I forget the exact wording, but, and I'm just, I believe you had referenced it, if I recall correctly, back when we changed our standards on TCE, when the department changed the standards, there was, some question about, should LSPs be looking back to say, hey, there were sites I closed that maybe are now should be looked at again, given the new information about the health effects of TCE.
Yeah, I think that reinforces the point I think I was trying to make very poorly, which is that we have been dealing with kind of issues about how the MCP cleanups kind of work over time, and issues do come up periodically with TCE and PCE where things change, and the departments and the LSP community and the PRPs have to kind of grapple with, well, what does that mean? And in some ways this is similar, and if some new information comes up in 2030, then whoever is at DEP at that time is going to have to kind of deal with the question of what is DEP's obligation as well to, is this a significant enough change? Is this something so different that, say, DEP would do what we did with the PC and TCE sites, which is DEP would also look back and identify the most at-risk sites and kind of work with the PRPs or the current owners at that point to figure out what to do. So I think it is part of the ongoing kind of how do you deal with change while giving certainty. And
yeah, I mean, the vapor intrusion was, of course, a unique situation. I mean, no other, there have been a lot of standard changes over the year, a lot of cleanup standard changes over the years, but it's only the vapor intrusion piece, the indoor air that you can't avoid, that has triggered relooking at sites.
Yeah.
So I would
So
expect there'd be the same
I think,
going forward.
sorry, I think one of the early questions folks should be thinking about, and I'm thinking about it too, and I actually am just an invitee to this discussion, so I appreciate the opportunity but on the model, having spent some time with the model, not the new enhanced one, but the Boston Harbor flood risk model, which the new one is, much greater area. There's two big data points, 2030 and 2070. And so you have to decide, is 2030 foreseeable? Well, probably, maybe based on this, but is 2070 foreseeable? Because they do present different information. And when you use foreseeable in the regulations, the model is going to show us 2030, 2070, and 2100. And so I predict there'll be some Q&A to DEP about, do I use 2030, 2070, or 2100 to determine whether something is foreseeable, because they are different in the results in the model.
I remember talking with one of your colleagues a number of years ago, Ms. Phillips, and they said foreseeable means, up until the point where you're dead. And so
yeah,
I'm thinking this is possibly one of the very few advantages of being older.
Yeah, foreseeable is what we call the Lawyer Full Employment Act.
Right.
See, I don't go up until, I don't view it as being up until you're dead. I view it up until you're retired. And it becomes somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I heard that a lot too.
Yeah.
That's only a few.
But as all of us who took John Bachner's Introduction to Professional Practice, remember the case study of the professional engineer being sued after dead, his family being sued.
Oh, that's right. His heirs
Really?
were on the hook. Yeah.
Does that work for DEP regulators as well, Matthew? I'm trying to figure that out.
So that's that wonderful legal, and Ms. Phillips will correct me, but the wonderful legal principle of sovereign immunity, right, Mr. Locke?
I certainly hope so. Well, the other good thing, being a state employee, it's not like we have huge estates that we leave behind.
But think about the dog.
Yeah, yeah. We have to care for the dog. So that will be a lot of, obviously this is going to be interesting and discussion as we move ahead. So at some point when we set up, I don't know if we need to set up a separate work group, if we'll be working with the LSPA group as well. But we'll have more discussions about this, and yeah, send in the questions that you would like answered in that Q&A. And I think you're providing some level of specificity, particularly in how long you look out, and within in models that give a range of potential results, where to focus as appropriately conservative endpoint is certainly something we can try to deliver.
Paul, is there a LSPA work group on the climate change issue, which I was not aware of?
I think Thursday at the talk last week, I think they had said that they were going to be setting up a group.
Yeah, I wasn't at the very end of that, so I missed that piece.
I think Marilyn's trying to weigh in on that.
I'm trying to talk. Yeah, it's a subgroup of the Tech Practices Committee, and they had their first meeting or part of the Tech Practices meeting last week. So, but there was a broadcast email asking if people were interested in joining it, and it's just getting started.
And Liz, I'm glad to hear that Ken Mara is the person on this, because I think, as Diane mentioned, there's a number of these terminal sites, and terminals tend to be located near water. And what I think one of the concerns is that the change in sea level could affect, leaving residual NAPL in place in tidally influenced sites. So anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed it, but Ken joined about halfway through this conversation. So,
Hi, Ken.
Ken, we're talking about, it started off talking about the climate change presentation last week, the difference in the model between the evaluation that was done by the BU student using the earlier model information, and what the standard of care is going to be, or the guidance that the department puts out with respect to how to do these assessments and what information to use for them.
All very good questions. Someday we'll have very good answers.
Well, one thing that has come up in this discussion is that Q&As that answer some of these central questions might be a good approach. You and I had discussed that we weren't going to write a long guidance document, but try to point to the best information. So I like Paul's suggestion that we can communicate this back to the LSPA subgroup of the tech practices, but maybe a good starting point is what are the central questions at the outset that we should be focusing on.
Okay. Who's running that subgroup? Do you know?
Marilyn?
It may end up being me. We haven't decided on a co-chair yet. But Michelle, Paul, and myself, because we're both on the LSPA board and part of the leadership of that subgroup. But right now it's a subgroup under tech practices. So.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Ken, that's okay. This will be over sometime in the foreseeable future.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I said, in the foreseeable future, we'll have something.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other topics or issues anybody would like to bring up?
Paul, it's Diane again.
Hey, Dan.
I'm sorry. I've participated every week for 4 months and never even opened my mouth except to say hello. And I apologize for
I saw your picture there, Diane.
disrupting if that's
Oh, not at all.
okay. So one question I had, and I meant to send it in via email and I forgot. I have heard that the department is now requiring or seeking or asking or suggesting in NORs that PFAS be evaluated for, motor vehicle accidents where fire departments have responded with foam, whether they be not even a whole tanker rollover, but a saddle tank or something like that. And it came to me as a rumor. So I'm just wondering if that's accurate and what the thinking on that is, if there is any, if you care to share.
Well, I can't say whether, well, I do not believe that this is a kind of a blanket, all situations will be addressed in the same way. I certainly know that there have been situations, and the one that comes immediately to mind happened near my house down the street in Revere, where there was a tanker rollover that got sprayed with foam, which got washed into the Rumney Marsh, which has shellfishing beds that were potentially affected. So certainly in that case, there was an expansion. Well, the investigation included looking for PFAS and knowing that PFAS foam was used on the tanker truck. So I think on individual cases in specific circumstances, that may be true. And
just sort of a follow-up question about that. How are you thinking that when the uninvited fire department comes to your spill, that the owner of the vehicle, owner-operator of the vehicle, or the owner of the property on which the fire department showed up and sprayed foam is the responsible party?
Well, this is where I'm going to plead the fifth, and I'm not even looking at my lawyer, who I think is here. And I would say first that DEP's concern, where we would be looking at feel that there was a need to look for PFAS, such as in the Rumney Marsh tanker turnover. We do so for particular reasons. If there was I remember there's a tanker truck issue on 93 many years ago, right by a public water supply well that was adjacent to the highway. And so there are situations where you might be concerned about the ecological issues. You might be concerned about things like shellfishing. They might be concerned about things like private or public wells in the immediate vicinity that might be affected. And so I would say we would probably look at it in that this is a release to the environment that has a higher probability of posing a risk, and something needs to be done about it. And I'm going to stop there in my analysis, because the beauty and the pain of kind of 21E and CERCLA, kind of at a larger scale, is that who are responsible parties and who are legally obligated to do things is messy and complicated. And I'm not a lawyer, so I would not jump into this in a lot more detail, but it's certainly something. Our first issue is there a need to do something? and let's get that done. And then the question of who ultimately is responsible and who ultimately pays for it is a legitimate and serious question, obviously. But the whole process, I believe, is structured so that the immediate question of does something need to get done, let's get it done, is often slightly separated from, okay, now who's going to pay for it? And that might involve DEP having to step in and do some work and then seeking cost recovery, and then who pays for it kind of, comes out of that. And those questions get answered in one way or another.
Yeah, I can thank you, Paul. I can just jump in briefly here. There are, I believe,
Luke Rogers, who is our attorney.
There may be, Diane, some active cases, and maybe even you are thinking about some of those cases that are being handled by the region. So clearly nothing that we're saying here at this meeting should be read as any kind of commentary regarding any of our intent to take enforcement action or the lack thereof at any of those particular sites. But as Paul said, it is something that we both in the legal department and in the policy side are aware of and thinking about.
Right, and I did not mean to put, I really was asking for information. I'm not talking about any specific case. I'm not trying to
Absolutely.
bind you to any specific case. I'm really trying to understand and the scientific reasons for why you want to look for PFAS in those circumstances, as Paul identified. I don't have any question about those. Those make perfect sense to me. I'm just trying to figure out, having, in the past and hopefully in the future, represented clients who are confronted with an NOR that says something about how best to, advise and respond, and it correlates with sort of the thinking on what you're thinking about it. But
oh yeah, no,
Diane, having worked with the PFAS sampling course group, Liz Denley and Jim Occolini, and particularly Steve LaRosa from Weston and Sampson and all his work on the St. Cobain sites, it's beginning to look as though the driver is going to be people that, the problem is the water supplies are testing, but private wells are not. So Massachusetts, among other states, has a large number of places where people are on private wells and they have not tested for PFAS. I think the thought is that when the driver will be that if people start testing, they will very likely find it, and then the question will be, where's the source? And so if you have sites where there are people on private wells around and those people test, you're going to then have to start answering that question.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. We're in it already. So.
Yeah, but they're also, we are going to be seeing sites, as Matthew just described, as we do more testing of private and public water supply wells. There'll be it's there now. How does DEP conduct the source discovery to find out where it comes from and what comes out from that? But Diane is also bringing up kind of looking at from the other direction of the immediate application of AFFF that has the legacy AFFF with the elevated PFAS, or lots of PFAS, that kind of if that gets used at a location, kind of what are the implications of that and what are different people's obligations? And
especially since you did such a good job in your take back effort, if there's still old AFFF out there,
Yeah, it's frustrating for us to, having done that, to still find pockets of legacy AFFF that's still out there. Yep. So one thing, actually new development that I can pass on related to PFAS is, as you may know, last year the legislature gave us eventually $8.4 million to do, sorry, not COVID, do a bunch of PFAS work, including sampling of public and private water supply wells. We just signed an MOA with folks at UMass Amherst to help coordinate and manage that process, which is a big milestone for getting it getting the sampling done. The public water supply systems have been doing. They've started doing the sampling, seeing the MCL and required sampling coming down the road fairly quickly. So a lot of systems have begun doing the sampling. We have been paying for the initial rounds of sampling for everybody for the public water supplies. But now that UMass is on board, we'll probably make more progress on doing private well sampling, particularly in areas that have no access to public water supplies, where we'll have less information about the groundwater. So there are quite a few, I would want to say around 70 towns in Massachusetts that have no community public water supplies out there, and actually 3 or 4 that don't even have any transient non-community supplies. So we'll be focusing on them. So we will be getting a better idea of kind of the overall presence of PFAS out there, and then we'll have to answer the questions of where it's coming, when you do see it, where it's coming from. But we're making progress on that, and the sampling should really start getting ahead of steam later in the summer and into the fall. So more to come with PFAS, as always. Anything else?
Hey, Paul, this is Cole again. I was in a LSPA regulations committee call yesterday along with Kelly, and the question came up, hate to put you on the spot, but if there's any update on the MCP regs, when they might be promulgated?
Oh, it's no problem. It's not putting me on the spot. Liz? Liz, you're muted.
We're still working on it. We had said we would have it out this calendar year, so that is still what we're aiming for. It's with me still. Okay. So it hasn't been fast going, I'll tell you that, but I certainly want to get it over the finish line, so I'm committed to continuing to make progress on that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, not seeing anything else. So next week is, I mentioned, the day before the holiday. So I would propose that we take next week off and have a good long weekend. Go away, do something, relax, and then we'll get back up again. That would be July 9th. We do that. So, and kind of along those lines, the theme for the week was dream vacations, or places where you would go once you get out of lockdown. So if anybody has any suggestions, as you can see, I would go to a cave, and this is what I would wish my basement looked like. But when we go on vacations, there is a dynamic of some people want to go and lie on a beach, and some people like to either hike up into the mountains or hike down into the mountains. So this particular cave, which one was that? Was actually on Grand Cayman, which most people go to the beaches there or go snorkeling. I went into the caves, and there are some great bats in there as well. But I have a similar one of, let's see if I can find it. Similarly, that would be a cave in Puerto Rico. So you can get these nice beaches, beautiful beaches, and well, some people are lying on the beach, other people can go underground.
Is that the rainforest part of Puerto Rico? Southwest corner?
No, this was actually more central and a little bit west. This was closer to the big radio antenna that's in Puerto Rico that always gets blown up in like Bond films and other
Arecibo.
movies.
Arecibo.
Yep. Which I also have pictures of, but not handy. All right. So what do you guys got for?
Well, that's in the Ecuadorian Andes.
Ooh,
wow.
We were supposed to go there this spring, actually, to my brother-in-law's 80th birthday party. But that's I don't know if it's my ideal vacation spot, but it's nice. And we've also been to the Galapagos there, which might be my ideal vacation spot. That was just beautiful.
Okay. Anybody else? You don't need pictures. You could just describe it.
I have a vacation plan for end of next month, whether it's ideal spot or not, but I'm going to Jamaica. It's a all adults, all inclusive vacation, and we'll be hanging on the beach quite some time and enjoying the adult beverages. So hopefully it's still going to happen. It was already canceled. Supposed to go to Punta Cana in April, but so this is a rebooking of the trip. So.
Oh, nice. Good luck.
For work.
Thanks.
Nantucket's coming.
So how are the islands dealing with this? Are there any restrictions going over there?
We called up the ferry, and so they're running at 50% occupancy. The shuttle buses are all 50%, between the parking lot and the terminals are 50%, so they're running more. You have to wear a mask on the boat. So I guess that'll work.
Yeah.
The restaurants are starting to open up. They're, have the ones that have outside seating will seat outside. It's funny, we're going to stay at a B&B, and usually they put out a nice breakfast spread, which they won't be allowed to do. So they'll, I guess, serve you in your room or give you. So they're making do.
Yeah.
The beaches are still there. So
yeah.
Are you bringing your car over, Elliot?
No. Bicycles. See, if you bring your bicycle, they put you at the head of the line on the ferry too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Anybody else want to chime in?
I literally was supposed to leave on a 2-week vacation today. That involved going to London to catch a European soccer game, and then half a week in Barcelona and traveling around Spain, and half a week in Denmark and traveling around Copenhagen. So obviously all of that got canceled. So now it's out there as my could have been perfect vacation. So I'm hoping that we can resurrect that trip.
Copenhagen's great.
Yeah. So are you watching European football on TV then?
Well, the EPL, the English Premier League, just started back up last weekend. So yes, I am back to. But we had tickets to go to the Euro Czech Republic versus England game in London. So, and we got everything refunded except for the soccer game, which was not because they say they're going to try and play it next year. So we'll see.
Yeah. Anybody else? Going once, going twice.
This is Linda. I can recommend a hike up. We had done this in 2017. We were in Bhutan and we hiked up to Tiger's Nest, which is a hike from 7,000 feet up to 10,000 feet. But the reason for going to Bhutan to recommend to this group is because its motto is gross national happiness. And it's the only country in the world with a negative carbon footprint. All their power is hydroelectric. And, you know, it's just, it's an enlightened monarchy. At this point, I think they may have only had 1 or 2 COVID cases, and maybe they won't be too happy to encourage visitors in the future. But it was a bucket list dream of my husband's, and we finally got to do it, and it is spectacular.
Where is Bhutan?
In the Himalayas, between India and China.
Wow.
If you look, it's to the east of Nepal.
And very small, right?
Very small. There's no traffic lights in the country. They had one, and the public wanted it removed because it was too impersonal. It's a very different experience.
Interesting.
Okay, well, with that, and I like the concept of gross national happiness. So 2
Well,
weeks.
we have it gross national, so it's
Yeah, well, work on your improving the gross national happiness by everybody incrementally improving their personal happiness. And see you in a couple weeks. July 9th.
Good 4th, everyone.
yeah, guys, happy 4th.
Happy 4th.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.